Hey, I'm Sarah, and this is Thrills and Kills Booktube, where we talk about everything horror, thriller, spooky, and scary. So today I'm going to do my November reading wrap-up. For me, it was not that great of a month. I only read 7 books. So for most people, they would probably be happy with reading 7 books, but we all know here on Booktube, it's not uncommon for people to read 15, 20, 25 books in a month. And usually people have all kinds of elaborate TBR plans and laying out every book they want to read for a month. And so I'm usually not very good at being able to stick to a plan. I did really good in September, even better in October, and so I had all these elaborate plans coming into November. I was going to participate in Nostalgic November Readathon. I was going to participate in Nonfiction November, read some books for my own book club that I run, and I was going to read some ARCs I had received from NetGalley and some library books. Well, I started off the month really strong, reading a library book, and I was loving it, and I thought, oh my god, this might be my favorite book of the whole year. And then a few days in, I started suffering with some health challenges, and then it all kind of went downhill from there. So in the end, I read 7 books and I enjoyed all of them. The lowest rating is like a 3.5 star. So despite all the health challenges and even the surgery I had to recover from this month, you know, at the end of the month, it truly was a good reading month regardless. So I really can't be unhappy about that. It just goes to show you, you know, you can't always stick to the best laid plans. So for December, lesson learned, I won't be doing such a extravagant TBR. But for today, let's talk about what I did read in November. Okay, so usually I start off with the books that I liked the least and then move my way up to the books that I liked the most. Now again, the least is a 3.5 star, and then the book I did like the most was 4.5, sort of teetering on actually giving it a 5 star. So it was a very good reading month if you look at whether I actually liked the books or not. Okay, so I'm going to start with the one physical book that I have, and this was my lowest rated book, but still it was a 3.5 star, so pretty good. And this is a quick little horror novella, Sour Candy by Keelan Patrick Burke. So I read this the night before I had to go in for surgery. I was tossing and turning and couldn't fall asleep, but I thought, let me just pick something up that's really short that I could read before I do fall asleep. And so this is only 74 pages, so that fit the bill. I had been seeing this recommended by a lot of people whose opinions I trust and who like similar books as I do. And so again, I enjoyed it. It just didn't live up to like the glowing, raving reviews of other people that I've seen across Booktube and Instagram. So if you're not aware, there is a man named Phil, and he goes to a store one day and he sees sort of a weird interaction with a mother and a child, or what he believes is a mother and her child, and by the end of the day, his entire life has been flipped upside down. So he was a divorced man, childless, lived kind of a bachelor lifestyle, did have a girlfriend, but by the end of the day, he finds that he himself is divorced, but actually does have a son who lives with him, and his life is completely turned upside down in ways that he could not even have imagined. And so the very first line really hooked me, and I had high hopes, and again, it was good, it just wasn't great. So the very first line: 4 months to the day he first encountered the boy at Walmart, the last of Phil Pendleton's teeth fell out. So there is some body horror as it relates to teeth, and that is kind of one of my like, oh no no's, like teeth and eyes. It wasn't too bad, but if you do have a problem with that as well, just know that going into it. So again, I was able to read it in one sitting. It went by very quickly. I did like the writing style. However, I think that it almost could have been done a little bit better if it was slightly longer. Maybe if it was 90 or 100 pages. There was a little bit of detail that I was sort of missing. It made it kind of hard to connect with the main character because it was just so quick. So it's definitely more focused on the action and not so much focused on like character development or story arcs. However, also it was a little bit hard to understand, well, like, why is this happening, and like the monsters that are there. I just wish there was a little bit more detail about them. That again, if maybe it was maybe like another 20 or so pages, that would have really helped out. I will say, so someone who does not want to have kids, and I did connect with the main character in that regard, and thinking about like, oh my god, if one day my life were just totally turned upside down and now I like had this kid and like there was nothing I could do to get rid of this kid, yeah, that part is pretty scary. So in a way it does sort of touch on like the horrors of parenthood, or at least how hard it can be. So it was scary in that regard, but otherwise it wasn't too scary or too gory. So yeah, sour candy. Now everything else I have is going to be on Kindle. So I actually don't use a Kindle e-reader. For the longest time I was using like an old beat up iPad. And then on Black Friday I found a good deal. I think it was like $260 for not the latest iPad, but like one generation removed. So I picked it up, and then I picked up this cover, and so I've been reading like a fiend ever since I got this on Saturday. And so this little cover, you can like fold it up so it's got a stand, and I actually read it like this way rather than up and down. And the next book that I read, also a 3.5 star, is Tender is the Flesh. Now I feel like this has been all over YouTube, Instagram, everyone knows what Tender in the Flesh is about. So I was reading this with MJ over at Reading This Life. She was doing sort of like a read along with a few people. I was kind of late to the game. I didn't start reading this until Thanksgiving. Now, full disclosure, I read this within 24 hours of having gone under anesthesia. I was taking opioid prescription pain pills, and so my memory is not that great, and I will admit that maybe I did myself a bit of a disservice, and at some point I should go back and reread it, because I'm sure there are details that I am missing. So if you're not aware, it does take place in sort of a dystopian society, and for some reason there has been a virus that has infected, or maybe it's a parasite, has infected every single animal on Earth, and it is no longer safe for humans to eat animals. And so obviously people need protein, and rather than just en masse all becoming vegans or finding plant-based sources of protein, the government legalizes cannibalism. So that's the basic synopsis. We do follow Marco, who does work in a slaughterhouse, and he is gifted sort of, I don't even know how to say it, like a specimen. He's gifted a woman who is not meant to be a companion. She's meant to be consumed, but he has other plans for her. So that's all I'm going to say. If you haven't read it, because as with most books in this genre, it's best to go in not knowing a whole lot of information. Now, I was expecting this to be extreme horror, splatterpunk, extreme gore, and while it definitely is disturbing, it wasn't to the level that I thought it might be. Now, maybe some of that is because my senses were dulled from pain meds, I don't know. But in a way, it almost felt like we were a bit distant from the action, like we were a step back, reserved from what was going on. Kind of like it was out here, it wasn't like right in front of our face. Now it definitely goes into detail about like the slaughterhouses and what happens, but just not to the level that I thought I was expecting. I think part of the reason it felt a little bit distant was they don't actually like really refer to them as humans. I don't know if it's a defense mechanism or it's just the way the author wanted to write, or maybe it's like the translation from Spanish, but they call them head. They don't ever say like they're eating human. So I'm sure part of that is some sort of defense mechanism to kind of trick their brains to think that they're not actually being cannibals, but that does lend itself to then feeling like you are somewhat removed from the horror in the story. And sometimes it kind of made it a little bit easy, not that you forget, but it kind of made it easy to gloss over the fact that this is actually cannibalism and they're eating humans. Now it's definitely a tough subject matter. I definitely think it's trying to take a stance on the meat industry and mass production of meat. So interestingly, my neighbor, so I live on a farm, my neighbor is a farmer, she runs a very large like pasture raised, grass fed operation of cattle, pigs, sheep, all different types, but cattle is her main product. And so I personally choose to eat it from her. If I'm going to eat meat, you certainly don't have to, no judgment, whatever you choose to eat, but it definitely was interesting reading this book, and I definitely think it's sort of a discourse on our consumption of animals and the mass production of that. So I was like, well, not me, because I'm eating grass-fed animals, but it definitely was interesting to think about. Okay, so I'm just referring to my notes again because I was under the influence when I read this book. I had to take some notes. I did think that I wanted to hear more about sort of the breakdown of society. You get glimpses and pieces, but not like the full story. So it's kind of like, okay, obviously this virus hit, society completely went crazy and broke down, and now we've got mass slaughter of human beings. So like, what happened in between? Like, how do we get from A to Z? I just wanted more detail there. It's a short book, it's under 300 pages. So again, maybe if there was another 20-30 pages, we could have explored that a little bit more. And I wanted to know also, like, okay, so not every single person is being eaten. It's not like free game. So how do they determine who can and can't be? I wanted more information around that. Sort of like the bureaucracy of it all, if you will. Now, as far as Marco, our narrator, our main character, like 95% of the book, if not more, like I hated his decisions. I was like, why are you doing this? This is so dumb. I didn't necessarily like him, especially as it relates to this female that he has basically captive. And then the very last page of the book, it's like, okay, I didn't know you were going to do that, but now that I know you did that, okay, you're forgiven. So obviously I can't tell you, you'll have to read it for yourself. But if you're in a similar boat and you're frustrated with him, just know on the very last page, you're probably going to feel 180, like completely different. So that is Tender is the Flesh. Okay, the next 3.5 star book that I read is called Stillwater Girls. I really enjoyed this one, much more than Tender is the Flesh, so it's kind of hard to say this is also a 3.5 star, but there's just enough pieces that I feel like holds it back from being a 4 star. So maybe there's like 3.75. So the Stillwater Girls, I read this as part of the November book pick for Grammar Readers Book Club over on Instagram. It also was on Kindle Unlimited, so it's, free if you have a Kindle Unlimited subscription. So this is a very fast-paced thriller. When you read the synopsis, it almost feels like maybe it's a little bit of a cult, but we are following Ren and Sage. These are 2 teenage girls, and they live in a cabin, like a remote cabin in the woods, and they live with their mother and their younger sister. And the book opens up where they have been left in this cabin, and their mother and sister left like 2 months ago because the little sister needed medical care. And the mom left in the middle of the night and was like, don't leave. If anyone knocks on the door, like don't open the door, you stay here till I come back. But it's winter time. Their food and their supplies are dwindling. Their chickens are dying left and right. Like they are going to be in some serious trouble if they don't either have their mom come back and rescue them, or if they don't leave soon. So that's one timeline, or one point of view. We're also following the point of view of a woman named Nicolette. She's married to her husband Brant, who's a famous photographer, and they live in this town of Stillwater. And she is desperate to have a child. So we learned that she had sort of like a medical emergency when she was younger, and she every December gets very, very deep into her depression and has these horrible dreams where she just is like aching to be a mother. And so she has signed her and her husband up to be foster parents. And at some point, the 2 stories, the 2 points of view converge. So I don't really want to tell you much more than that. There's a little bit of a setup in the beginning, but then once the stories converge, it is very fast paced from there. I read this within 24 hours. It's very, very easy to read. It's not that the writing is an elevator, the writing isn't good, it's very easy to consume quickly. Now, I will say that the author, I think that she handled the dual narratives very well. Those can be tricky, and I've read books where they don't work. And there even are some flashbacks to memories, and so I think she did a really good job handling all those pieces. There is a twist that I think you'll see coming, and then there's a twist that maybe half of us would see coming, half of us wouldn't. Either way, I think both of them were done very well. Even if you see it coming, it just was handled quite well, and it was still entertaining. Again, I'm looking at my notes. I thought the character development was great. Especially the marriage between Nicolette and Brant. So Nicolette is very suspicious because she has found something and leads her to believe that her husband has been cheating on her. And so it's just very interesting to be in her mind as she's like trying to figure out why the password on his phone is different and going through his drawers and like his email, all of this, because I can't say that I'm not also a little bit crazy and I wouldn't have done the same thing. So it was just really interesting being in her headspace for that whole part. There are a few trigger warnings, especially if you've ever suffered like infertility or a loss. So there are some trigger warnings around that and like postpartum depression. There were a few pieces that didn't quite work for me, and this is why I'm like, is it a 3.5? Is it a 4? I don't know. So the girls eventually are kind of brought out, and it's pretty obvious if you read the synopsis. They're not going to stay in that cabin forever. And you would think they've been isolated their whole life. They've only ever known their mom and their other sister. Now they're like out in this strange world. Obviously it would take them a long time to adapt. Well, it's very fast, and in the book it's like they're adapting left and right, where it's like, okay, no, clearly these people would be like shell-shocked and would not be adapting to real life this quickly and willing to talk to strangers and go in a car and know how to put a seatbelt on. So there were like logical pieces that just didn't quite work for me, but because of the length of the book, obviously she had to speed it up. I also thought like, okay, well the cabin wasn't that far away from civilization, so how realistic is it that they went, 15, 16, 17 years and no one ever found them? That was also like, I'm not quite sure about that. And then Nicolette's medical situation, I can't give you much more detail because that's part of the whole twist, but when you read the book, or if you read the book, or if you have, the big reveal around it is like, there's no way everyone knew about this and this was a secret. Like, it's just very unrealistic. So you do have to suspend your disbelief a little bit, but those are just some of the reasons I think that I can't quite give it a 4-star, but I really, really enjoyed it. So now on to, I have 2 4-star reads. The first one, I also read this very, very quickly. It's a horror novella, Come Closer by Sarah Gran. So I got this on Kindle. I also have it on Audible. I didn't realize, but I just read it on Kindle because I thought it was quicker than trying to listen to it. And so this is a possession story told from the first person of a woman named Amanda, who is the one being possessed. Because it's a very quick book. It's like maybe 250 pages. And so it just kind of shows like the slow takeover that the demon has over her. And she actually does find a book about demonic possession, and there's a quiz, and then throughout the book she's like answering the questions, and you see how like each subsequent time that she answers it, like she scores higher and higher, and so she's like more and more possessed. And so that was cool. I hadn't read anything like that previously. It was not necessarily scary. Putting aside the fact that it's about a demonic possession, it almost felt like realistic in a way. It just wasn't necessarily that scary. Obviously she's terrified because she's living through it, but there aren't like really like gory scenes or anything like that. Like I said, it's pretty short. It left me feeling really sad because you get to the end, like you start to really feel for Amanda because she's just trying to live a normal life, and she's really sad how this is impacting like her marriage and her employment and just her life in general, and she's trying to fight it, and she's trying multiple ways to kind of fight this off, but she's just never finds a way to be successful. In the end, I just felt really sad. I was like, well, all that happened and destroyed her life, and like for what, right? Which I guess the demon doesn't need a reason. They just enjoy, if they exist, they just enjoy destroying people's lives. So that kind of left me feeling a little bit sad. And I did think there were some unique ways that she tries to remove the demon from her. They don't ever call it like an exorcism. So she tries some interesting routes. The next 4-star I had, this is an ARC that I received through NetGalley, and I was really looking forward to reading this. This is the one prompt from Kelsey at Slime and Slasher's Nostalgic November Readathon that I was able to complete. I was shooting for 3 prompts. It is what it is, but I finished 1. And so this is Gothic by Philip Fracassi, and I think this is coming out in February. So this is a 2023 release. I really enjoyed it. Obviously, I gave it a 4-star. So we are following Tyson Parks, and he is a famous horror writer, and he is kind of coming towards the end of his career. He used to be super famous. His books were really scary, best-selling, like competing with Stephen King sort of a thing. But it's been a while. It's been at least 10 years since he's had a bestseller, and the money is running out, and he is really like desperate to have like another hit. And so his longtime girlfriend named Sarah, who lives with him, his birthday is coming up, and so she wants to get him a really special birthday gift. And so she ends up finding him this beautiful, ornate, like Victorian age, or maybe even older. It's a desk. So it's a wooden desk, writing desk, and it's got like this stone inlay and all these beautiful carvings, and it came from Europe. And so she surprises him on his 59th birthday, and he loves it. But things in their life start going sideways really, really fast. What's interesting is when I finished the book, I kind of went back and was like, the time frame from when he got the desk to when like shit just really was terrible and his life was forever altered was like a matter of days. So he gets his book and everything goes sideways. So he starts waking up in the middle of the night. He can't sleep, and so he goes to start writing at the desk. And so he's had writer's block for years. He's tried everything, but suddenly he's writing like 12 hours a day, not leaving the desk, to the point where like his fingernails are cracked and his fingers are bleeding, and he hasn't peed all day, and like he doesn't realize it. So he's sort of blacking out, not realizing how much time he's spending there. He's getting like angrier and angrier and like just short-tempered. Trigger warning, there is a scene with like domestic violence and like some sexual assault against his partner, and he's just essentially losing control. So this is a possession story, but it's interesting in that it's not the person being possessed directly. He's being possessed through this desk. There's also like a secondary storyline of this woman named Diana Montresor, and the Montresor family is like this family of nobility from France, and way back in their line there was some sorcerers, and there was a stone altar that was taken from them by a man called Signor Croce, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but you get the whole backstory of how it goes back in time to like the 1600s, and how this altar has been taken from the family, and the Montresor family has been looking for it ever since, because it's a very powerful piece of occult magic. And so she gets tipped off that it is now part of this desk, and it is in New York City, and it is in Tyson Park's home. And so she is on a quest to get it back. And so those two storylines converge. So he's starting to write, and they're very graphic books, but his publisher can like not sell them fast enough. Like they're like, this is the best thing you've ever written. Oh my God, like keep it up. We don't know where this came from, but you're gonna like outsell King. But they're getting darker and darker and more aggressive. And then something extremely horrible happens to like everyone in his life. And so it kind of like asks the question, you know, like what are you willing to sacrifice in order to have like everything you've ever wanted? So like fame, money, a best-selling novel. So that's sort of the synopsis, if you will. I did think, like I said, it was a really unique take on a possession novel. I did enjoy that. Tyson himself, like in the beginning, you're like, oh, come on, dude. Like you're just a whiny, like washed up writer. You're really obnoxious. Like get it together, man. But then towards the end of the book, when you see how much he's changed, you're almost like, oh my God, we wish we could get that version of him back, because now he's just obnoxious and we don't like him. It also kind of shows like the ripple effect that a possession can have. So it's not just him being impacted, but like what about the books that he's written, and then people are reading them, and he wrote it at a possessed desk that was also possessing him. So what impact does that have on the readers out there? It goes into that, and it's pretty sad and scary. Once he starts writing, like the events and how it unfolds, it's very fast paced. Like I said, it kind of happens within a week where his life is just turned upside down. Very, very interesting. It does flash back and forth to tell you the story about the Montresor family and like where this altar, now a desk, has been throughout its history. That part was very well done. I didn't know it was coming, so the first time it flips like back in history, it was a little bit jarring, but then you kind of learn to expect it. I just wish that it had a little bit more. I would have wanted to know more about that on that storyline. The ending was just so bleak. Not what I was expecting. So this book is really reminiscent of like pulp fiction or like horror novels of their heyday, like 70s and 80s, like Stephen King or Richard Lehman. And there is even a line in the book where they're discussing Tyson's like new books that he's writing and how extreme they are. And they're like, man, like Richard Lehman, like they couldn't even sell his books back in the 80s, like, and you have gone well past what he ever wrote. And if you look at the cover, I'll put it up here again, it very clearly is meant to look like a nostalgic, like old school horror book. It reads that way for sure. And it was just, that was really cool because a lot of modern day horror is almost, I don't know, like cutesy. Like you've got Grady Hendrix, and then like Rachel Harrison, I got her newest book recently. So it just was like, this is what horror is meant to be. So 4-star, I'm almost even leaning on like a 4.5-star, but I really enjoyed it. Okay, now I have 2 books left. Let me start with Leech by Hiram Ennis. I previously did a standalone video about this, so I can put it up here. So I'm not going to go into too much detail other than to say, like, this is now one of my favorite books of the whole year. It didn't quite knock out Revelator as my #1 book so far, but it's like neck and neck. And so this book is sci-fi, gothic, horror, steampunk, dark fantasy. It's just a lot. It's a lot of things that's very hard to describe. It's very odd. And it is following one narrator, but it's a hive mind. So there is this institute, which is a hive mind, a parasite almost, of physicians in this other world. It's like Earth, but it's not quite like Earth. And so he or she, because they're unnamed, are traveling north to this baron who lives in the chateau in the very far northern reaches of this land, where it's very, very cold, and it's a colony, and the physician who is caring for the baron has died. And so now this new physician going up there has to sort of try and unravel the mystery. What happened? Because how did this body die and we didn't know about? We're a hive mind, we know everything all at once. So how did this physician become disconnected from the hive mind and die without anyone knowing that they were even ill? Like, it's very alarming to them. It has a lot to say about colonization, bodily autonomy, like consent, the for-profit American healthcare system, even the way that we train resident physicians in healthcare. And what's interesting is the author is in medical, or was at least in medical school. I don't know if they're still in medical school, if they started residency, but was at least in medical school when writing the book. So there are medical terms, but it's not written to a level that a layperson couldn't understand. There's context clues. I think it's quite accessible, even if you don't work in healthcare. I do, and so I found that part really enjoyable. But it's a very hard book to explain. It's very, very weird in the best way possible. I don't want to take up too much time in this video, so if you're interested, you can go up there and click on that and check that out. Okay, the last book I have to talk about, I just finished this book today, and I am still I'm trying to process. So this is a 4.5 star because there's just a few things holding me back. And also it's one of those books that it sounds very odd to say like you enjoyed it, because you didn't enjoy it. You felt depressed. You felt like heartbroken. And so how can you get to the end of a book like that made you so depressed and bleak and dark and say you loved it? but I loved it. It was so good. So this is Left to You by Daniel Volpe. And so I am in this Facebook group called Books of Horror, and they have the best suggestions. It is such a good Facebook group. And I kept seeing this pop up, and it was on Kindle Unlimited, so I grabbed it. And I didn't know much of what it was about. Now, if you look at the cover, it's very clear that that is like a concentration camp, and this is going to have something to do with the Holocaust. Well, I should have done some more research and made sure I was in the right headspace. It's a short enough book that I just kind of was like, put my head down and finish it. But you definitely, I think you need to be in the right headspace to read this type of book. So this is hard to categorize because the first half of the book, it's basically a very bleak and very realistic historical fiction based at Auschwitz. But the second half of the book is, I have donkeys, they're trying to say it's dinner time. The second half of the book is like extreme horror, splatterpunk with a demon. Now it's not possessed because the person has control over the demon down in their basement, but it's around a demon. So who would have thought that a book about the Holocaust and a book about demons would be melded together, but it works. So it's dark, it's intense, it's heartbreaking, but it's also very respectful, and it's very clear that the author has done a lot of research. Now, I've read a lot about the Holocaust, just having had like family who came over after all of that, and it's sort of like a time in history I've always been interested in researching about. But obviously, if you're writing about it, it takes a certain level of sensitivity and respect. And again, going into it thinking a horror book about this, I don't know. It just works very well. Like I said, he clearly did a lot of research, and I felt like I was transported, like I was there. Like if you've ever seen Schindler's List, like I felt like I was like rewatching that in a way, or The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. Like it was just so well done. Now, basically what's happening is we start in the present time, and then we flash back to the Holocaust, and then we flash forward like 10 years after the Holocaust, and then we flash forward again to present time. So in present time, there is a young man named Robert. His mother is dying from cancer. She's always a single mom. Like she's all he has in the world. He's working dead-end jobs to try and make ends meet. He works at a grocery store, and there is an old man, Joseph Lazarowitz, who comes in all the time, and he's kind of befriended this old man. This old man unfortunately lived through the Holocaust. He made it out of Auschwitz, but his family died. And so he one night has Robert come over because he wants to tell him a story. Then it flashes back, and it's his experience losing his family at Auschwitz, what he went through. He was a theology professor, so there is a way that he is able to kind of get extra perks and able to get out. I don't want to tell you much, but it has to do with one of the lieutenants there. Then it flashes forward again to him 10 years after the Holocaust, and he is in New York City. Now he's emigrated to the US, and he runs into that lieutenant, and then that's where like the demon piece comes out. And then it flash forwards again back to modern day, where he's telling this story to Robert, and he is filling Robert in, and Robert is like, I don't know if I fucking believe you. And then something happens where Robert sees it with his own eyes, and he fucking believes him about this demon. And I don't want to tell you much more from there. So that's the basic gist of it. Now I saw someone wrote a review, and they said, imagine, so if Clive Barker rewrote Eli Wiesel's The Night, or Eli Wiesel's The Night, I'm never quite sure how to pronounce that, but I was like, oh, that's a really interesting combination, and I think that explains it quite well. What I thought was really well done, other than like the writing and the research and how realistic it seemed, was the moving back and forth through time, and then almost like it's like two totally different genres. Like I said, the first half of the book is a very realistic historical fiction. The second half is a splatterpunk extreme horror. And you would think you either can write one or the other. They were both so well done. I cannot give enough praise for that. It also like definitely brings up the question of how far would you go to save someone that you love? And it definitely makes you kind of question your own moral compass and think about like, what would I do if I was in that person's position, and what would I be tempted to do, and how far would I take it? And those pieces were just really well thought out and written about. There was one thing that I felt like the very last scene and the kind of like a twist at the end, it was like, I don't know if that quite worked. That seemed like out of left field. It might have been better if that wasn't done. So that's kind of the only thing that's holding me back from giving this a full 5 stars. And then also, like, how do you give a 5-star to a book where you felt depressed and dark and just heartbroken and bleak? I don't know. That seems odd to me, but I can't say enough good things about this book. And if you have Kindle Unlimited, it's on there. Okay. Wasn't that great of a reading month as far as quantity, but as far as quality, I'll take it. I'm just happy that I was able, first of all, to move past my health concerns for the month, and second of all, even get to finish 1 book, let alone 7, that I enjoyed all of them. I'm halfway done with Nightmare Fuel. I'll just have to roll that into December. I was planning to read that as my nonfiction November pick. It's about the psychology of why we like to be scared. And it's very interesting, but it is a lot of research and scientific and parts of the brain and what parts of the brain light up when we watch horror. So it's hard to really breeze through it. You have to kind of dedicate time to sit down and read something that you want to think about. So I was hoping to be able to include that here. It is what it is. That'll be next month. But lesson learned for December, while I'm still sort of kind of moving out of these health concerns, I'm going to keep my TBR list short and sweet and mostly just mood read and see where it goes, because it's also a very busy time of year. So that's all I have for you today. Let me know down in the comments, what are you most looking forward to for the month of December? For me, it's the fact that my husband's company shuts down. So for the last 2 weeks of the year, while I'll still be working and I work from home, he doesn't have to work at all. So we'll get to spend some good quality time together. But that's everything I have for you guys today. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.